Hi, and welcome to the Sit Down with Suzanne podcast. I am your host, Suzanne. Well, who am I? I am a author, a motivational speaker, a minister, and a leader with over 20 odd years of experience in multi-million dollar corporation leadership. I am so excited today, though, because I have with me today a very, very special guest. And I actually got her bio. I'm just going to give you a little bit of who she is, but I think that she can describe herself best. I met this ray of sunshine at She Podcast, where Everything Podcast was born for me personally. I can't believe it's been almost 2 years now. It's
Yeah.
yeah, 2019, and I saw this gorgeous blonde standing there, so fit, something that I desire to be my whole life. And she was just a ray of light. And we went over, we said hi to each other, we just started talking, and it went on from there. And she is awesome. She is phenomenal. And, we just started following each other on Facebook and just, leave like an encouraging word on each other's page and things like that. So I am going to introduce you to the phenomenal Miss Alissa Daire.
Yay. It's such an honor to be here, Suzanne, and you are a ray of sunshine as well, and which is I think why we were just like magnetized towards one another. It was just a an introduction that was waiting to happen, and She Podcast happened to provide us the opportunity to do so. So I thank you for all of the bright light that you bring into this world because um, we need lots of bright light in this time of darkness. We'll call it.
Okay. But we're coming out of the darkness, I think. Thank you, Jesus.
We're coming out. We're
All
coming
right.
out.
All right. So, Alissa, I know that you are a success coach. There's so much things that you do. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do? A little of your bio.
Yeah. So I am, my business is success coaching. I call it success coaching because it's not just business coaching. I do believe that business owners and all folks can have it all, as long as it's aligned with their core values, right? And so often what holds us back is actually a fear of success. So the population that I work with is business owners and executives. In part because they tend to carry a little bit more stress, and they're trying to, and I'm using air quotes here, balance everything. And balance, I think, is a fallacy that's been threaded into our society. If you look at a balance scale, it in order for it to actually balance, nothing's moving. And that's just not reality. So instead, I teach harmony, and I teach and coach people through making sure that they're having the success that they want and need in their business, but not at the sacrifice of all of the other things. So I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners who are sprinting towards burnout and are kind of in the back of their mind questioning whether they can maintain that kind of trajectory without losing their health, their integrity, their relationships that are important to them, etc. So that's what I do for business, and in general, that aligns with who I am. I am, all about bold leadership. And I really try to bring that into my personal life as well, to kind of figure out, am I doing what I can be doing? Am I leading from a place of being empowered myself? Am I having courageous conversations? Um, am I being the person that I really want to be inside and outside of my business, and inside and outside of my home? It's not only important for me to be sort of a good example to my clients, but even more importantly, to my kids. So I have two teenage daughters who are looking to me for leadership, and I'll be darned if they look at me with disappointment. So that's a little bit about me. I'm kind of, like I said, I focus on business owners, but it bleeds into everything else, which it should.
It should. It absolutely should. And you kind of dove a little bit in what our conversation is going to be about. So I'm not going to give them the hint yet of what our topic's going to be about. But you said something very important, I believe, and it's something that I've talked about quite a bit in my career. It's, the idea of having it all.
Mhm.
And people believe that you have to sacrifice something. You can't be happy at home and happy at work. You can't be happy at work and happy at home. And I think a lot of times, women do end up bearing the brunt of it because we want to be great mothers, and we should be, and we want to be great at work, so we want to be fulfilled both personally and professionally. And
Mhm.
sometimes there's a challenge because we feel that we have to give up who we are to be everything for everyone. And you're right, we get burnt out. I was there myself personally. I was in my 20s, long time ago, but I still look fabulous.
Yes, you do.
So, I felt that being successful me meant doing everything and not taking care of me.
Yeah.
And that was a mistake that I had to learn the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think that's there's a difference there. There's a nuance, right? Doing everything doesn't equate to having it all. And sometimes, in order to have it all, you have to say no to a lot of things. And so that can feel like a sacrifice to some folks. But that's why I say you can have it all aligned with your core values.
Absolutely.
And that's the key part that I think a lot of people are missing, because more is not always better. It's just more.
Hmm.
And as women, we do tend to take the weight of the world on our shoulders, and think we have to do everything. And we've over glorified this sense of independence,
Hmm.
right? Like we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, and there's value to that. And interdependence is how the human race is how humans as a species, were built to function. We were built to function in community where I depend on you and you depend on me. And the difference is it a healthy dependence, right? Where I'm
Hmm.
asking you to bring all of the best of you and you're asking me to bring all of the best of me, and together we tackle something? Or is it unhealthy where I have expectations of you and I'm judging you, and it's scorekeeping and it's transactional relationships, etc. And so, I like the idea of being interdependent, which means that it's okay to ask for help.
Hmm.
And it's okay to say, hey, this isn't a strength for me, but I see it's a strength for you. Can we collaborate? And that doesn't show weakness, it actually shows immense strength.
It does. Absolutely. And, I'm going to have to invite you back on for a business strategy podcast, just to for some encouragement for some, entrepreneurs out there that are really striving to be authentic to who they are and be successful professionally, because sometimes they're not aligned. And I think that's where it
Yeah.
gets out of whack. I mean, like I said, I've personally experienced it where who I wanted to be didn't align with who I was. And, it's a harsh lesson to learn, but sometimes it's a necessary lesson.
Mhm.
Because I feel that if you have to be somebody else professionally, eventually it's going to wear a toll on you because you just have to step outside of yourself, and not in the right way, I believe. So I thank you for that. And please, I will share her contact information that you can follow her on all the social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and all of them, just to ensure you get her words of wisdom. So I invited Miss Alissa to this podcast today because I don't know if you guys are aware, there's a little thing called racial reckoning that's happening. So Alissa happens to be Caucasian and I happen to be Black. And, we are not blind, and we have seen some, how do I put this delicately? Some much needed conversation
Mhm.
that needed to happen, some racial reckoning that needed to happen. I kind of felt that there was a lot of, eye opening moments in 2020 that happened and allowed a lot of people, I thought, to see what I experienced, what the Black race experienced. And I have been following Alissa on social media, and I know noticed that she posts, things. And one of the things I like about your post is that you're not afraid to say, I don't know this. I don't understand this. I can only give you my authentic, honest reaction and what I think is good and what I think is right as a human being. And you have had some hateful responses I've
Mhm.
seen. And, I like how you have answered each with grace and not go negative. What Michelle Obama said, when they go low, you go high. But girl,
Michelle is in my ear all the time. I'm telling you.
yes, sometimes, Michelle, it's a little hard to go high, but we try because,
Yeah.
your daughters are looking, and
Mhm.
it's so much bigger than them. I think it's about who you want to be as a person. And that's why when somebody's so negative, sometimes I have to step back, because I said, I could answer them in kind, but it doesn't align in who I am and who I'm trying to be. So I wanted to, what was the eye-opening moment for you that was 2020 that you kind of really started looking at race relations differently?
Yeah. In order to answer that, I actually need to back up just a little bit. I was brought up in white suburban America, like many white folks were, and I was taught to love your neighbor and all of those things. I was taught to not see color, all of those things. And I didn't recognize that I had internal um, racist beliefs until it was about 8.5 years ago now. I was pulled over by a police officer, and he was really mean and really rude. And I had my two little kids in the back seat who were afraid. And we'd always taught our kids, like most white folks do, the police are there to protect you. They're there to save. So if you hear sirens, they're going to help somebody. Um, and here, my two little girls were afraid of this police officer. They were afraid that he was going to arrest me. Um, for speeding, right? And I rolled up my window after he gave me that ticket, and I heard myself say, and I think this is a really important thing for anyone who is white listening, to hear your own thoughts, because the thought I had that I actually heard for the first time was, "What the heck? I'm a white woman with two kids in the back. Why did he treat me that way?" So, there's a lot to unravel there. Number one being why did I recognize my whiteness there? Number two being that I felt that my whiteness should have prevented him from treating me poorly, which then points to my belief underlying that I also thought it was okay for him to treat somebody of color differently.
Oh,
And I had to reckon with that. And I was shocked and appalled by all of that. I went into a giant shame spiral, and I didn't tell that story for almost 5 years.
wow.
And meanwhile, I'm slowly trying to figure out, like, what does that mean? Am I racist? Is this, am I a bad person? All of these things that a lot of people are going through right now. And so it's really only been over the last couple of years that I've chosen to do more education, self education, that I've chosen to seek out relationships with people who don't look like me, that I've chosen to really own and understand what white privilege is all about. And then in my hometown on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. And um, it it was a call to sort of, for lack of a better term, get into the battle in a much more meaningful way. And I recognized my ability to walk away and to turn a blind eye, that was the epitome of my white privilege, because I can go to Target and go, I want to take a break right now. And walking into Target, it's fine, right? I get to walk away from this conversation and not be in it, because it is exhausting and it is tiring, and it's a lot to process, and these conversations are hard. But people of color can't just walk away from that conversation, because it comes with you, right? And so, recognizing that my role is to be brave enough to have these conversations, even when I'm uncomfortable, even when I'm tired, and even when I'd rather lash out, to intentionally respond with compassion and love and understanding. So, that's how I've kind of come to today. But, that journey didn't start, May 25th of 2020. It started a long time before that. And so my heart is to help other folks, specifically white folks, to, shorten that 5 years of shame and doubt and, internal self-flagellation, to something that's much more valuable and productive. And like, the urgency is there, and people are dying. Literally, people are dying every single day, based on the color of their skin in this country. And so I feel it's my duty to get uncomfortable.
Okay. All right. So much there. Thank you for sharing that story in regards to 8 years ago. And, I applaud you honestly for even recognize that that is a privilege and that is a thought, because it is. And people always think that, racism is somebody wearing, the Ku Klux Klan thing and, throwing torches and things like that. But it's little seeds like that that germinate. And it could have gone in a different way. You could have verbalized that in front of your kids and they hear that and they verbalize it. And I think that's how hatred and racism continues, generation to generation. And, you decided to do the work. So I thank you for that. But I also want to ask you this. So last year with the George Floyd situation that happened in your neighborhood, what were some of the conversations that you had with family members in regards to that?
Yeah, well, we had, and again, I think the most valuable conversations happen in your home, right? So, immediately, and actually back this up even before George Floyd was murdered, the about a week before that, if that, the video of Ahmaud Arbery's murder
Hmm.
was released. And so there was this whole thing on social media: walk or run 2.23 miles, in honor of Ahmaud. And so I looked at my daughters and I was like, well, I'm not running. So, but ladies, put
Yeah.
on your tennis shoes. We're going for a walk. And
Hmm.
so the three of us, put our tennis shoes on and we went for a 2.23-mile walk. And during that walk, we talked about, what do you do if you see something racist? What do you do if someone says something racist? Let's talk about that and sort of plan some of those responses, because when you're in the middle of it, you're kind of shocked into silence, right?
Hmm.
And so you become complicit, because why? It's uncomfortable to do something else, to step up, to say something, especially when the typical response back was, well, it was just a joke, right?
Hmm.
And so that was one of the most the earliest, I guess, intentional conversations about race and about how to respond to racism that my girls and I had. Um, and again, the girls were, they're on social media, they're teenagers,
Hmm.
and they're like, well, mom, how do we address this on social media? And so I pressed the question back, well, how do you want to address this on social media? Where do you want to stand? What do you believe? And those conversations are just so valuable. And I had a similar conversations with my white husband as well, about, do we go down in March? Do we go down and get involved that way? What is our role? What, do we put a sign out? Those kinds of things. And I tend to be fairly passionate in my beliefs, and my husband is my perfect balance, in that he's very even keeled, and very, very rational. And so it was even more uncomfortable for him when I was really speaking out and wanting to, I told him, I said, I'm going to go down to these protests. And so, you're welcome to come with me, but I'm going to go. He's like, well, you're going to go by yourself? And I was like, yeah. He goes, well, that makes me nervous. And I said, it does not make me nervous, but if you'd like to come with me, you may. So
Absolutely.
it was kind of one of those conversations. So, he and I have had a lot of really challenging conversations, as well. And I'm so proud of us being able to come together, through those, quite frankly, arguments, about where I'm at, where he's at, and some of those other things, which, don't need to go into detail on those, because everybody's conversations are different. But we chose to do the courageous thing and have those conversations, even though they did erupt at times, and
Mhm,
they were really uncomfortable. That
mhm.
they're important too important not to have. So that's really where it started for me was, how can we make sure that our home is anti-racist, not just not racist.
Mhm.
And there is a difference in intentionality there, um, that I think is really, really important for white folks to recognize.
Absolutely. And there's a great book to say titled, How to Be Anti-Racist. And people think that, being racist is enough. And I thought for a very long time too, to like really explore that, how to be anti-racist, because there's thoughts and things that we have. And I think we all have prejudices and bias. Like I think people who drink coffee like all day long, crazy, but that's a bias. That's not something that I'm going to hate on somebody for that. But when it comes to skin color and cultures and things like that, we have such great divide, we have such hatred. And the thing what happened with Ahmaud and Brianna and George Floyd, and people were shocked. And one of the things I said to people, it was kind of like a catalyst for so many, but it wasn't new to me. It
That's right.
wasn't new to the Black race. I am used to um, like being treated differently. Like when you got pulled over, and when I get pulled over, it's expected. I don't expect not to get pulled over. And my thought when I am pulled over, like, please don't let it be a trigger happy cop that's going to shoot me in front of my kids. That's my
Mhm.
thought. It's not, why did they pull me over? It's an expectation. And that's a burden to always go around thinking. And people will think like, I'm happy go lucky, I'm a positive person, but people are thinking, it's like, it's not that deep, but it is.
Yeah.
Because to walk a mile in a Black person's shoe, and I'm not speaking for all Black persons, and I don't expect you to speak for the entire Caucasian race. I mean, we
Yeah.
can't do that. But like you said, you could turn it off. You could say, I need a break from social media. I cannot. There are times when I do take a break from social media, but I still have to leave my home and go to work. And I still have to leave my home and go to a store. And I still have to have conversations with my 7-year-old daughter why people hate her because of the color of her skin. Why, George, they thought it was okay to murder George Floyd. And I still have not watched that video. I saw the beginning. I
Yeah.
just cannot bring myself to watch it. There's so many names that, I feel like I'm always explaining to my kids, it's the whole world isn't like this. It's not always like this. And I think one of the disadvantage that Black parents have, um, when you're a white person and you're raising your child, you tell them respect the police are good. There are people that's going to hate you. It's not a conversation that you have. That
Right.
I don't think so. I mean, I've never met a white parent, so I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. But as a Black parent, I think the conversation starts with, be good. If you get pulled over, make sure your hands are there. They don't see you. You're not reaching for anything. Things like that. Fear the police, and the police are good. So it's such a mixed message. And then we are telling them, at least for me, being a Christian, that people are going to hate you for no reason, but you need to show love.
Mhm.
When somebody who's teaching hate is just saying just hate them, they're less than, they're not human beings. So I think automatically it puts them at a disservice, right there going out, and it's confusing.
Mhm.
I had to stop and think and take many breaks to have this conversation with my 7-year-old daughter. Why it's not okay for her to hate, even though there are racist people who are telling their kids to hate. So, you know, how do we move forward? How do you think, and again, I'm not expecting you to speak for the entire, Caucasian race, but how do we move forward? How, and I know you said that you were very uncomfortable because the conversations are uncomfortable, but how do you
Mhm.
envision us moving forward if we are not first willing to have these conversations with each other and at our home?
Yeah. So I actually think the bigger issue is not hatred. I think the bigger issue is apathy. And I heard this from my gymnastics coach of all people when I was young, and it has stuck with me ever since. And what he said was, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is apathy. And so that is what I want, the message that I have for people is care. You just care. I have sort of ground rules for conversations, especially these uncomfortable ones. Number one, no name calling because it's dehumanizing. And the moment that we dehumanize whoever is on the other side of that conversation, we see them as less than human, right? And this is at baseline that one of the biggest problems. Brene Brown says it's hard to hate somebody up close. Right. So get into a conversation with somebody who doesn't look like you, who doesn't believe like you, but make sure that there's no name calling. I always try to approach conversations with compassion and empathy, to really understand, where might this be rooted from. Another one of my favorite quotes is from Professor Ronald Heifetz, and he said, "People do not fear change; they fear loss." And, when you fear loss, right, that fear erupts inside of you. And no wonder we have people that are defensive, that are scared, that are pressing back because they're fearing losing some sort of status. Now, again, fearing losing status as a white person points directly to the fact that they know that things aren't equal. If equality gives you a sense of loss,
Mhm.
then what you innately understand is that other people have it worse. And so, again, I've gotten into many conversations about the term white privilege, that people are like, well, I grew up in a working class home, and I worked for every dime, and yada yada yada. I'm like, hey, me too. Like, I started working when I was 11 years old. I was one of 7 kids. Nothing was handed to me, except I got to do it in white skin. And so it's not to say that white folks aren't working hard and don't have obstacles. It's that our skin color is not one of them.
Mhm.
Um, and you had mentioned, how police do treat people of color differently, et cetera. And, one of the things that and mainstream media, I think, has gotten a little bit of an unfair shake over the last year here and last 4 years, let's be honest. But the fact of the matter is that when a black man specifically is dies at the hands of police. Okay, especially if he's unarmed, and this happens to women of color as well. Instantly, it goes to, what's his criminal record? Well, I guarantee you that many of the people who are listening to this podcast interview right now have never heard the name Jonathan Price. Jonathan Price was murdered this summer at the hands of a police officer. But guess what? He didn't have a criminal background. He was unarmed. He was breaking up a fight, and a police officer showed up on the scene, and he explained what was going on. Now, notably, Jonathan Price was a motivational speaker. He was a pinnacle of a role model in his hometown in Texas. Everybody loved him, is what everything says, right? And he was pro police. He would post on his Facebook about being pro police, just be respectful, everything's going to be okay, etc. And this man was murdered at the hands of this police officer. Now, this police officer was arrested for murder, and this story didn't gain national attention. um, he also wasn't a very attractive black man as well, so I think that played into, well, we can't let that out, and he didn't have a criminal background. So because those things we weren't able to point to those things as to why he deserved to be murdered. It didn't get national attention. What? But these things happen all the time. um and And so unfortunately, it's also the context and the story that's told around these incidents. And that also is something that we need to collectively have a reckoning about, is what is the whole story here? And guess what? I don't care if so and so had a criminal background. It doesn't mean that that police officer gets to be judge, jury, and executioner. That is not their role.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and again, I'm also pro police in the fact that they do keep us safe. From chaos, right? I'm not an advocate for completely dismantling the police force, but lordy lou, do we need to have a reckoning
Mm-hmm.
with what is going on inside of these police departments? I think it's also notable that after the insurrection on January 6th, that the FBI went in and they started looking for the National Guardsmen, et cetera, who were going to be stationed at the inauguration, and looking for signs of links to white supremacy. Why aren't we doing that in our police forces, folks? Like,
Yeah.
that should be done because those links are there. And
Mm-hmm.
those people who had links to white supremacy groups, they were removed from
Mm-hmm.
service. Why aren't we doing that to our police forces? And again, it's not enough to root out the people who are actively hateful, because hate is actually a little bit more visible. So thank goodness for that. It's the
Mm-hmm.
people who have the apathy and the internal biases that make them feel more afraid of
Mm-hmm.
a person of color than someone who looks like them.
Okay.
Right. And these are the uncomfortable conversations, but it's hard to get people to the table because there is so much shame that we feel. And I'm going to say we collectively, white folks, because I see it in people who are resistant, and I see it in people who are beginning to acknowledge it as well, of like, oh my gosh, how have I contributed to this atrocity that
Mm-hmm.
is systemic racism? So you don't have to be actively, overtly racist. You don't have to be wearing a Klan hood in
Mm.
order to be a part of the problem. If you are not a part of the solution, you are by default part of the problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that you do hit a point about apathy. I think that a lot of times we do expect our haters, people who, in racism, to be blatant, right? And I think that people that are in position of power that has the ability to do something and does nothing about it, they are just as much a part of the problems as the one that are blatantly, and they go out there. There are people in places that say nothing when something happened. They turn the TV off. They say turn a blind eye. And I think one of the things that they do is they justify with a criminal record so they don't have to reconcile with the fact that this is the taking of a human life. Well, he he was a drug addict, so
Mhm.
it's okay. He didn't pay child support, whatever the reason, they do try to justify and find a reason why it's okay to kill Black men. And I do find that if it's something, I look at like the Dylan Roof situation, who got taken to Burger King after killing
Yep.
so many. Kyle Rittenhouse, we have people in the Senate, and famous people paying for his bail. He went across state lines with a weapon to kill. But how do I then have this conversation with my child that the world is fair? So I'm asking you, how do I then have a conversation with my child with the world is fair when they see these things, when I can't protect them from seeing these things?
I think the honest conversation is that it's not fair. Um, and as a no matter who you are, no matter what the color of your skin is, the world is not fair. And in addition, when your skin color is not Caucasian, right, you have additional obstacles and boundary and barriers,
Hmm.
which could cost you your life. And I think that's honest. Now,
Hmm.
I have never been in a position to have that conversation with a child. um y- I'm not a mother of a child of color, and my heart shatters thinking about when do you have that conversation? And I don't feel like I have any wisdom to offer to when that conversation occurs and all of those things. But the honest truth is it's not fair, and we have a lot of work to do. Um, I do actually believe, and this might be controversial. We'll see how this goes over. I do believe that white women are um, the transformational um, answer to our our racial justice issues. Um, Not because we're saviors, not because we're all that amazing, because we can talk about weaponized white femininity in a minute if you really want to, but because our BIPOC communities have already been in this fight.
Mm. No choice.
And no choice,
No
right? So,
choice.
I hear people say, well, I mean, they had a black president for 8 years. Why wasn't this fixed? Which, like my, like, that's when I need to go breathe for a little bit and whatever. They need to step up and stop, let's talk about black on black crime. Let's talk about blah, 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 blah. Like all of the defensive conversations that come up, right? About how they need to fix this issue. Well, the BIPOC communities have already been fighting. It's time for us to join that fight. And the reality is that white that women are more emotionally connected, typically. Um, and I've seen much more awakeness and awareness come out of women, right? And the fact is that we live to a large degree with the white men
Mm.
who also need to come to a reckoning with these things. And so, if we can stand up and have these conversations and as relational human beings, right, come together to listen first before coming in and try to sort of save the situation,
Hmm.
then we are the answer. Again, not because not because we're amazing, but because we're finally joining the fight.
Hmm.
And this is a numbers game. We have to have more people joining this fight.
No, absolutely. So ever since the George Floyd situations happened, I have had some different conversations, I will say, with my Caucasian counterparts. Some people avoid it. Um, some people think like I talk about it too much, and just some people get very defensive. I think maybe there's one or two Caucasian friend that I've had, I should say peers, um, that are willing to have an honest conversation because automatically they go defensive, thinking I'm accusing them of starting this whole thing. I'm not, but I think they have to take a responsibility that their silence, their apathy, to just brush it off or say it doesn't impact me or what were they doing contributed to the issue.
That's right.
And, I think about he who shall not be named, who's no longer in the White House.
Yay.
We're going to do this. How he was very divisive,
Mhm.
and just the things that he said, and just against my race. I mean, I personally believe that he is racist. People disagree. But I think he wasn't very shy about it. I think he was very obvious about it. But his base grew again with Caucasian women. I mean, can you explain that to me? Sorry, I'm throwing that
I
on you there.
know, I know. It's really challenging. It's really challenging, and I see it everywhere. I mean, I've done my fair share of unfollowing and unfriending when it's just when I see that someone's not ready to have that
Hmm.
conversation, right? Until they're ready to have the conversation, you're talking to a wall, and so you do have to kind of meet people in the gap, but they have to be willing to come to the gap, as it were. Again, the compassionate side of me says it's coming from a place of fear. They just don't want to lose ground. Um, Now, I don't know if that's true or if there's other things that are coming up for these women. I it's really hard for me to wrap my head around all of that. What I will say about the previous president, it's so good to call him previous. And by the way,
Yes.
I am not anti-Republican. I am not anti-Republican. I love our democratic discourse. I love that democracy is messy and slow because what it means is that there's everybody's opinion in the mix of it. This is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about this particular human being who I'm glad is not in office anymore. But the thing that I'm really grateful for about his presidency was that he unmasked what was already there. All of this racism was already there.
Yeah.
All of this bigotry was already there. You know, these folks who showed up at the Capitol building wearing sweatshirts that say Camp Auschwitz, wearing sweatshirts that said, 6 million wasn't enough. It makes my skin crawl, right? Um, these white supremacists that marched with torches and then were called very good human beings. Those kinds of things. What it did was it unmasked what was already there. And here's the honest truth: white folks needed to see it because quite simply, we didn't have to see it before.
Yeah.
Like you felt it, right?
Every day.
People of color feel it at work every day. Those little microaggressions that show you who people truly are. Um, living here in Minnesota, we are one of the most segregated states in the nation, and our racial disparities are the worst, ranking like 48th, 49th in a variety of different areas in the country. Well, we're a northern state. Like, what do you mean? Well, I mean, we can talk about redlining, all these other things, but here's the thing: is that people of color actually have told me this is a scarier place to be than down in the South. I'm like, tell me more about that. Why is that? And what they've told me, and I've heard it from several of my friends who have lived in both places, both North and South. At least in the South, I can see it.
Mm.
Here in the North, here in Minnesota, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's masked. But
Mm.
the one good thing about the last 4 years is that it's unmasked a lot of that. And now, when you bring that wound to the surface, when you
Mm.
debride that wound, you can actually let it, begin the healing process. Um, and so I think that there is some good because we are having more of these conversations. We're also having a lot of resistance to those conversations, again, because they're uncomfortable. But that I am grateful for.
Okay. I think you might have found the one positive thing in the last 4 years.
It is a search, but darn it, I will find the silver lining.
I've been hard pressed to find it, and I think you did. And you are absolutely correct. The enemy that I know is, it's better to deal with that one than the one that you don't know, because
Yeah.
it unmasked a lot of folks that you thought were on your side. And not even your side, I should say. It was just a decent human being. It allowed people to just be very blatant in their hate, but I was very surprised to see many people and their reaction. People that always spoke with me, laughed with me, and then just came out so vocally against Black Lives Matter.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Have you seen One Night in Miami yet? Have you
I
seen that
haven't yet.
movie?
It's on Amazon Prime. I'm
It's
waiting to
on
watch it
Amazon
with my
Prime.
husband.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I just watched it last night, which is why this is fresh. But in the movie, Jim Brown, who was a football player
Hmm.
back in the '60s, there's a scene where he is with a white guy who is a friend of his aunt's, something like that. And he said, "Well, you told me you wanted to see me. I was back in town, so here I am." And they're sitting on the guy's porch, right? And the guy is talking to him, this older white gentleman, was talking to him about how, whatever you need, I'm here for you, da 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 da. And the guy's daughter, adult daughter, comes out and says, Dad, I need some help moving a piece of furniture. And Jim Brown stands up and he said, well, I'm happy to help. Like, he's big, tall, muscular, strong guy. And the guy walks in over the threshold of the house, right into the house, and he turns around and he's like, well, thanks for the offer, but we don't let N words in the house. Right. And so, like, this is the masking that I'm talking about. Like, he was talking to him like, hey, you're my friend, you're my friend, you're my friend, I'm here to help, and da 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 da. But then turns around and says something like that. I
Wow.
mean, talk about my entire body just halted in that moment, because it's just like I cannot imagine. And that's the masking. That's the stuff that's under the surface that, again, white folks don't have to deal with
No.
that,
Wow.
right? Unless we are willing to be intentionally uncomfortable.
Mm,
And gosh, when you're willing to do that,
mm,
the learning that you can do. But I think the key is, and maybe this is the takeaway for any white folks who are listening. Um, don't let yourself get caught in the shame of it, because
mm,
shame isn't helpful.
mm-mm,
Um, Brene Brown does a really beautiful job of differentiating shame and guilt.
mm-hmm,
And then these other emotions that are even different, right? So guilt is about behavior, and it's about rectifying the behavior. Shame is about your identity. And so that's the reason that when I'm talking to somebody, I don't label them a racist. I call out the racist behavior,
mm-hmm.
because I don't know a single, well, I mean, I don't communicate or have conversations with white supremacists, so maybe they would own this identity. But I don't know any person who is white who will own the identity of being a racist. Everybody resists that
True.
label, right?
True.
Because we don't want to be. That's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing. That's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
But let's identify racist beliefs and racist behavior and deal with that,
Mm-hmm.
because until we just look at it, and it's uncomfortable, sure, we can't actually move forward from it,
Yeah.
right? So let's give up the shame. Shame only lives in silence,
Mm-hmm.
which is also an important thing, right? And so if shame only lives in silence, what it requires is us to talk about it. And
Absolutely.
one of the things that the book White Fragility sort of laid onto white folks, right, is this idea that white folks are a burden to black folks, and that you shouldn't be unloading and processing your white supremacy and your racism with your black friends. I would say yes and no. What is your relationship with that person? Do you have permission? Is that a relationship that is, are you giving that person, the opportunity to say, I can't have this conversation with you. You need to go do some education on your own. It's that's nuanced, and so that's in the individual relationship. But unload and unpack your frustration and guilt and even resistance about white privilege, white supremacy, racism with your white friends
Mm-hmm.
first.
Mm-hmm.
And my encouragement is then to go to your black friends. Many people have their one black friend, right?
Just one.
Just one, just one. And say, tell me your story.
Mm.
Tell me your experience. And just shut up and listen.
I have found, and thank you, they don't want to hear.
Hmm.
I think they'll try, but the minute you start to talk, then they start to make excuse. And it could go back to the guilt that they're feeling and
Yes.
the shame. And you're right, because when you're ashamed of something, it's hard to push and move forward. I think about the conversation with sex that I'm going to have with my daughter soon and pray for me. She's 14. So I've been pushing it off. We've had some, but we haven't had the sit down and the whole 9 yards thing yet. And this COVID at home school has allowed me to push it off another year. Um, but as girls, there's a lot of shame associated with sex and our sexuality. So I had to do a lot of learning to understand how to have a conversation with my daughter so she doesn't feel shame and ashamed of if she has sexual urges or her own sexuality. But I grew up in the island and sex was wrong, sex was bad. You only
Mhm.
had sex to have kids and you're married, and that's it. Like there was just no conversation about it. So I grew up being shameful or ashamed of any sexual urges. So it's something that I had to seriously educate myself so that I don't bring that shame to my daughter. And I think I find that sometimes when I'm having a conversation with a Caucasian person in regards to race, um, they are ashamed that I'm calling them a racist. So they try to make excuses and says, well, not everybody is racist. And
Mhm.
I am not calling them, but you have to acknowledge the fact that these things happen every single day. My daughter, the first time we had a conversation with her, she was 3 or 4 years old in regards to police brutality, hatred, and it wasn't something that I wanted to have, but it's she saw it happen and being around family members and having conversation. And I remember a couple years ago, there was they had killed a police officer, or shot a police officer in the town that I lived. And I heard that it was a Black man. And honestly, I don't even remember if it was a Black man that did it, but I remember calling my husband, my brothers, my cousins, and says, get off the road until they find this person. Because in my mind, I knew that any Black person was fair game. And
Mhm.
never thought of, the little kids being home, how that played out to them, because I was just worried and panicked and freaked out that one of them might not come home that night. And they observe our behaviors and things like that. So I've had to have a lot of honest conversations with them in regards to race. And I find they took it better than a lot of my Caucasian counterpart now. Um, and I found that a lot of Caucasians that honestly I thought were my friends now are uncomfortable being around me because they think I'm going to talk about race.
Yeah. Well, we need to talk about race, and you get all these people who are like, if we just stop talking about, they'll quote Morgan Freeman, right? You see that quote, where he says, like the reason we have race problems is because we keep talking about race, but unfortunately, until we don't have a problem with race, we need to talk about race,
Hmm.
and kind of coming circling back, and thank you for sharing all of that, circling back to a white person asking a person of color, and again, that like I'm talking about, the Black experience is a very different experience than an immigrant experience. That's very different than Indigenous experience, is very different than
Hmm.
Hispanic experience, etc. So like go listen to many stories. It's so valuable. But to say to the person of color who is on the receiving end of that conversation, to and to have the permission, to say, I didn't ask you to defend this. You asked me for my experience. I'm sharing my experience, because I also have had that conversation with many of my friends of color who are like, yeah, it's just not even worth having that discussion, because when I share my experience, it's immediately defense. And so so white folks, just shut up for a moment and just listen. Yeah, you're going to have feelings come up inside of you, like, that are resistant, but I'm not like that. That's not me. Don't you know that's not me? Okay, so stop. Like, notice that that's coming up, because that's something that you want to deal with, but that's not something that you want to unload on your friend of color. It might be that you say, gosh, I hope I've never made you feel that way. And I've had that conversation with many of my friends of color, to say, have I made you feel that way?
Mm,
And, for the most part, the answer has been no, which I've been very grateful to hear. But there have been times where, like, you did this one thing one time,
mm,
and that gives me an opportunity to say, I'm sorry, and it won't happen again.
okay.
And then we get to move forward, right?
Absolutely.
But until we let our ego down, until we let our defenses down, we can't truly have that connection that we need in order to A, be accountable,
Mm,
B, reconcile, and C, heal and move forward. So often, and we're seeing it right now, right? This call from the Republicans, to for unity. and we have to have accountability before we can reconcile and move forward. Accountability
Absolutely.
is part of love. It is part of healing. It is not
Hmm.
a nice thing. We are not going to sweep this stuff under the rug. What has been going on for 400 years has been going on for 400 years. No, it may not have been you. It may not have even been your ancestors who were the perpetrators, but you are the beneficiary of what has occurred. Um, and we need to own that,
Mm.
which doesn't mean I need to self-flagellate. But we need to own it and address it in a humble way so that
Mm.
we can move forward. So I sure hope that there are more white folks out there who are willing to have this conversation. And this is why people have asked me, Alissa, why do you bother with Facebook? Why do you
Hmm.
bother, bringing these conversations forward? Don't you know that Facebook isn't the place to have those conversations? And I would say, those conversations need to start someplace. And B, my goal is awareness and education.
Hmm.
And I share a lot of stories
Hmm.
on Facebook, and I do open a lot of questions. And when things get tough, in a thread, I'm absolutely willing to take that to a private conversation because there's less defense in a private
Hmm.
conversation.
Absolutely.
And I just had this conversation with a with a white dude, the other day about, you're calling everybody racist. And I said, no, the insurrectionists were largely white males. So,
Yeah.
like, I'm just calling this out as factual. That you're hearing I'm calling you a racist is an entirely different conversation. And he said, well, this is a conversation that's better for in person or privately. And I said, hey, I'm willing to have that. If you're courageous enough to have this publicly, I think there's a lot of people that would benefit. But by all means, let's set up a conversation. And you know
Hmm.
what he did? He said, no, that's okay. I'm zooming out now. So, again, it was, he's not ready yet.
No.
He's not ready yet. And I can't change that, but
No.
I can still be here in a place of compassion when he is.
Hmm.
And that's all I can do. But I've had lots of really valuable conversations based on Facebook posts. So I don't think social media is all lost. I do think we need to be careful, and I do think we need to guard our hearts, as it were,
Yeah.
because it is also really draining.
Hmm.
And I wanted to say this as well, like, and this is something that I'm still challenged with personally. I know we're kind of running out of time here,
It's
um,
okay.
but I've had guilt over my needing to retreat and recoup.
Mm.
And the thing that I'm wrestling with currently is, am I retreating because I can, or am I retreating because I need some self care? And I don't, again, I'm in the middle of wrestling with that, because there's times where for days at a time, I'm just kind of silent, because I'm processing and, letting people have their moments, and then I'll come back in, and I know that I'm going to jump back in the conversation. But, like, the question is, like, am I backing off because I can, and that's part of my white privilege, or because I need to recharge? And if I'm burnt out, I'm no good for the movement.
Mm.
Right. But we being willing to have that conversation with myself, as I move forward, I think is also really important, because, I'm never going to be fully awake. And guess what, Suzanne? You won't ever be either. right?
Nope.
Like none of us will be. So, my first woke moment was 8.5 years ago, getting
Mm-hmm.
that ticket from that police officers. That was my first true woke moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had a million since then. And
Yeah.
I will continue to have a million. Why? Because I'm dedicated to be having uncomfortable conversations. I'm dedicated to the learning, and I'm dedicated to being a part of the solution rather than a complicit part of the problem.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your honesty in all this. And, I mean, it is what it is in some respect. And I like the fact that they're not going to allow this to get swept under the rug, right? There has to be accountability. And I understand the Republican Party is calling for unity. But I will tell you this, if this is a resurrection is allowed to happen and there's no accountability, that will not bring unity because it will once more
Mhm.
show Black folks that Black lives doesn't matter,
Yeah.
because it was such a blatant, hate filled, they were beating police officers. And again, they say they stand for Blue Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and they killed police officers. And it just, I don't, I can't grasp such hatred that somebody would be so disillusioned and turn around and believe that their life is so much better than somebody else and so much more valuable. And the person who wore the shirt about what happened with the Holocaust. I
Yeah.
mean, I watched Schindler's List once, I couldn't watch it again because, and you're right, I was able to not, but the Jewish people have lived with this forever. And it's just heartbreaking to see and to think that we are still in this situation. And there are folks that think it was okay.
Yeah. And there will always be those folks. There will
Yeah.
always be those folks. And I think
Yeah.
that's something also to be willing to acknowledge.
Mm.
It's still not okay, but again, that's part of the reason why we do need a police force,
We do.
because there's always going to be people who want to create anarchy, or want to be opportunistic about anarchy, or just simply want to take advantage and take things that are not theirs. Um, and that's across the board.
Hmm.
And an unfortunate part of human nature, is to want more. And if you think you can take it, sometimes you do.
Mm.
And that goes back to integrity, but also I'm not too prideful to go, huh, when have there been times that I've taken advantage of that?
Mm.
Maybe it's not been in some big way, but maybe I printed a 50-page document and I own my own business now. So this is not current, right? But maybe I printed a 50-page document at work when I'm only supposed to print, and that was for me personally,
Hmm.
and not for work. Like that's an abuse of
Hmm.
supplies, and
Hmm.
so, like, being honest about those kinds of things, it's not impossible for us to go down that slippery slope. And so, I think it's also important for us to realize that these people who got caught up in that hot mess that the insurrection was, there was mob mentality. And so I do want
Mm.
to acknowledge that. I don't
Hmm.
believe that everybody who went to that march intended um, on trying to overthrow the government.
Mm.
I do think there were some,
Mm.
and regardless of whether you did or didn't intend to go there, and break laws, the second you walked over that threshold of the Capitol building, you did.
Mm.
And I saw so many people go like, well, I just got caught up in the moment. Okay. But you still need to be accountable for that. Right.
Absolutely.
And, and people who just didn't stop and think that this was wrong.
Hmm.
That's a problem. And
Mm.
also, those kinds of things can happen. Like if we're too arrogant to acknowledge that at some point or another, we could get swept up into something if we're not diligent about our
Mm.
sense making, if we're not diligent about our fact checking, if we're not diligent about staying aligned with our core values and what is right and wrong, that it's we also can fall into that. And so some humility on, quote, the other side, I think is really important too.
mm,
to not demonize the all of the people who were there during that march and in that insurrection. And do I agree with it? No, I don't at all. Do I understand it? No, I don't. um and also I can have compassion for people who are there still, because they're still humans.
mm,
Which is that's hard. It's hard for me to even say, because it's much far easier for me to say, hey, they were all a bunch of dummies, and I
mm.
and racists, and they should all go to jail, and you know our world would be a better place. But our world is messier than that, and we have to be willing to sit with the mess again. Another uncomfortable conversation.
It is. I will say this. Sometimes it is exhausting being Black.
Mm,
Um, I think that at times we're expected to bear the brunt of what's
yes.
happening and then turn around and be the savior,
Yep.
to make it okay for another race to hold us down, another race to treat us poorly, and then we are called poor sports if we don't then turn around and forgive our oppressors.
That's right.
It's exhausted. I come from a place of love. I'm a person of faith, but there are times that we are asked to show compassion to people who don't show compassion to us.
And
It's
who are unapologetic about it. That's
yes,
again going back to that accountability,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
just don't care. So we are asked to show compassion, show a little grace, show a little mercy to the person with their foot on my neck. I think that people assume sometimes being Black that we want a handout. I don't want a handout. When people talk about reparations, it's not about getting anything I didn't work for. When people talk about affirmative action, it's not about getting a job that I'm not qualified for. It's saying that don't disqualify me if I have the same qualifications, but I'm Black.
Hmm.
When we talk about defunding the police, it's not about disbanding the police because we need law and order. Otherwise, it will be anarchy. It's about just repurposing some of the funds of the police
That's right.
force to focus on de escalation training. I mean, I get de escalation training and I work in retail. And I work in retail. Is it too much to ask that the police force gets this? It's dealing with on a daily basis people being shocked and amazed by my hairstyle and touching my hair.
Oh,
It seems like such a simple thing, but my personal space, it's like touching my hair. Like, can I touch and like in my hair and rubbing my hair and it's these little microaggression and it's they had to pass things like the Crown Act, to say it's okay to wear my hair in the natural state, yet still I do see Caucasian with pink, purple, green hair that is not natural. And it's beautiful. It's who you are. Do you?
hmm,
So it does get exhausted. Even now,
yeah,
I am asked to help them understand what it feels like with the George Floyd, the Ahmaud Arbery, even Emmett Till, which was so long ago, Trayvon Martin, all these incidents. Like I have to then make them feel better. So I go from being the oppressed to being the oppressed, comforting my oppressor.
hmm,
So it's exhausting. And I think, one of the things that you'll see right now, it's like we're fed up. We're just tired and exhausted of being looked at as less than human. But on the other hand, we are people of faith and we believe that this world can be a better place, even America. And the life that we want for our kids, I think, is what keeps us fighting to work together to have a better place, to have a better America, so that we don't teach hate, so that we don't become the very thing that we despise.
hmm.
So, I'm going to ask you this. What do you say? And I'm going to ask you a two-part question. What do you say to a white person who is saying to you, Alissa, why are you doing this? You're just trying to get Black folks to like you.
No.
And what do you say to a Black friend that says, why you're doing this? Are you trying to be a savior?
Mm,
Because I've seen similar situation with someone who has, like you, tried to learn and tried to help and tried to educate yourself to be a part of the solution.
yeah. So what I would say to um, to white folks is that I'm simply not willing to be a part of the problem. I don't have anyone in my direct family who is a person of color. I'm married to a white man. I grew up in a white family. None of my siblings are married to people of color. Actually, aside from my sister, she married a Hispanic man. Um, uh, and so this doesn't affect me um, in the classic way that you might consider it. Um, I don't have to send my kids out of the house and be afraid that they're not going to come home because of the color of their skin. But when some of us are held down, it holds us all down. And that's why this is important. And it's simply the right thing to do. So even though it's uncomfortable, it is part of what I believe is the right thing to do in my core to do what's right, even when it's not easy, right? Courage over comfort. And I have some uh, confidants, some mentors of mine that are also friends. And for instance, one I just called my friend Dawn um, the other week because I said, hey, there's an issue I'm having with a person of color, and I need help. I need your advice. I need you to point out some blind spots that I might have. And as we worked through and she said yes. And again, I didn't assume that she would be willing to have that conversation, but this is how our part of how our conversations and relationship has been developed, is that we have that understanding that I can come to her. And so it wasn't an assumption, it was something that we explicitly talked about, which I think is another important respectful thing to do. And so as we started to uncover it, and she said, would you be struggling with this decision if this person was white? And I said, absolutely not. It would be a hell no. And she said, okay. And I went, oh my gosh, I was falling into white saviorism, wasn't I? And she goes, you were. And I love you. And I was like, okay, thank you for pointing that out and for walking me, for being gentle with me through it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's stuff that I'm still uncovering. And,
Mm-hmm.
so first things first, you have to go be aware of what is white saviorism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is centering. When am I grabbing the mic and making this about me instead of handing the mic over and amplifying other voices? I need to be conscious of that because I do love the microphone, as is evidence from today. And I do think it's important to speak, right? But it's even more important to listen. And so, um, you know, she is my person. My Dawn is my person who we have the relationship where I've asked her, please call me out. And I have other friends as well, but she's my closest friend in this respect, to call me out when she sees me step out of line. Um, and like the criticisms from people who don't know me don't mean a whole lot. But feedback from somebody who I have invited into my circle, who knows me, who knows my heart, and who loves me enough to say the hard things, that's who I'll listen to, right? And so, that's something that I'm conscious of. I know that I haven't emerged from that. And because I am a helper at my core, like I'm the number 2 on the Enneagram, it's natural for me to want to help. And so it's also natural for me to fall into saviorism.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not conscious of it, and if I don't have a sounding board and someone to call me out when that's the case. But again, those are relationships that I've built. And I'm humble enough to know that I'm still growing there.
Wonderful. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. I think relationships are so important. And it's important that there are boundaries in relationship, and you know what, you're given and what you're getting, and what's comfortable to talk to with somebody and what's not comfortable to talk to with somebody. And I'm so grateful for relationships in my life that allows me to do that. And I'm glad that you have that in your life. Whether it's the same race or not, we are all human beings. And I personally like connection and partnership. I've never met a stranger. I have not.
Right? Me neither. That's why we were fast friends when we first met. We're like,
Exactly.
hey,
We just
we're
met
all
and we're
friends.
like, we just like, okay, it was just like that instant connection. And I love that. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that because there's reservations about things, and race and things like that. And I don't think race is an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but I don't think it's something that we shouldn't talk about, because we're not going to move forward if we're not. And I really do appreciate, your willingness and your transparency, to admit that you are learning, as am I.
Mhm.
I am not the authority on Blacks. I am the authority on Suzanne.
That's right.
And and for my kids for now. And I think, but I think that we have to be willing to learn, and we have to be willing to understand somebody else's perspective and somebody else's point of view, and be able to want to dig deeper to see where they're coming from and why they
Mhm.
might be reacting like that. It's not always easy to do, especially when you feel like you are being taken advantage of, especially when you feel like you're not being treated fairly, because we have this concept of fairness as a kid, right? Like, you have to be fair, you have to be fair. And you're right, the world isn't fair to whoever you are. There are fairness between the sexes. It's not fair. Fairness between races and cultures, and tall people and short people. It's funny. I'm over 5'11". I'm normally in heels, and I never think about like a step stool. And somebody at work asked me the other day, oh, where's the step stool? And I was like it was just
That's the best. I'm 5'4", so I like to wear like 5 or 6 inch heels just so I can even try to be at your level. And then on top of that, I still use step
Oh
stools.
wow. So it's funny. So it's privilege, right? When people say it's like I have no privilege, but you don't realize like that's a privilege, because I've never had to. I just reach for what I want. And she's like, where's the step stool? It was like a foreign concept to me. I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, the step stool to reach. And I'm like, you just do this. And then I'm like, oh, okay. So you're 5'2". So it's a little difference. You definitely need the step stool. So it's kind of recognizing that we all have something
Yeah.
makes us different, that makes us unique. And it's our willingness to step outside of our comfort zone. It's our willingness to understand the other party, which is really the only thing that's gonna, move us forward. We have seen a racial reckoning, and it's going to continue.
Yes.
And I think it should. And I think that, like I said, I thank you. And I know that they kind of redefined the word ally. Everybody was saying not everybody that says Black Lives Matter is an ally, but I think it's somebody who's willing to learn, who's willing to educate not only themselves, but the people in their immediate circle. It's the person who's willing to say, it's not okay to make that racist joke. It just really isn't. And starting from small step as there, and trying to let go of the guilt, because and the shame, we're not going to move forward if we're ashamed. And I'm trying very, very hard to move forward in terms of this racial disparity, and still stand up for who I am, and still try to not shut down with somebody who doesn't look like me, to say, okay, just give them a chance if they ask a question that is quite obvious, because sometimes what is obvious to you, like a step stool, is not obvious to others.
Yeah.
So
And also, it's okay for you as a person of color, and again, not that you need my permission, but I think somebody out there maybe needs to hear this. It's okay for you to shut a conversation down and say, "I I can't have this conversation with you right now," or maybe ever, right? To protect your own energy and your own space, that's what boundaries are for. And you talked about the how exhausted you are. And what I want to underscore is and I've heard this literally from every single Black friend that I know. It's an exhaustion that is in your bones.
Mm.
It is beyond tired. It's not a kind of exhaustion that is taken care of by a week on the beach. Like, this is an inner exhaustion,
Yeah.
because this has been your entire life. And we haven't even touched generational trauma, right?
Oh, honey.
but and so for white folks, I want you to recognize that this exhaustion is a deep exhaustion. And for people of color who might be listening, it's also okay for you to shut us down and say, you got to go do your own work. I can't be that person for you right now. And be done with it. Like, um we have to be willing to honor each other's boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And as an ally, and there's another term that has come up for me in the last year, which is accomplice, which is kind of next level of ally. Like, an ally will stand next to you, and an accomplice will stand in front, right? And not in front to center themselves, but in front to say, if we're talking about like a police line, or for something
Mm-hmm.
like that, if you get the picture,
Mm-hmm.
that I know I'm less likely to get shot,
Mm.
and I will absolutely, in a heartbeat, stand in front of one of my friends of color, to be that sort of human shield. Is that dangerous? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But to me, that's the kind of human I want to be. That's the kind
Mm.
of human that I strive to be. Is not someone who's just going to stand next to you and the Black community in this journey. I hate to use the word fight, but it really is that. But to be on the forefront, and to be willing to take some of those stabs and jabs and assaults, both verbal and otherwise. That's who I strive to be. I don't always succeed there. There's times where
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired. There's times where I'm scared, and I back away, or I back off a conversation, etc. So it's a continuous striving. But and that's the thing, is that just start little, right? And
Mm-hmm.
educate yourself, and then you can be a better ally. Don't check in with your Black friends when yet another unarmed Black man dies and said, "Hey, how are you?" Because the answer is going to be, "How the F do you think I am?" Right? So instead, saying, "Hey, I saw this on the news. I this is awful. I want to be a better ally. How can I support you right now?"
Mm.
And it's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I thank you for that. No, I've had to, unfortunately, like I said, and I said friends, and then they've moved to peers or counterparts, because I found they're not willing to have the conversation, and I'm just not willing to lose me
Yeah.
in order to let them feel better about themselves, because we're not there yet. I don't think
Amen.
we're there as a nation. I don't think we're there. We need to do work on all sides. And I've said, yeah, just, you got to figure it out on your own. I've got what books do you recommend? Right? White Fragility, How to Be Anti-Racist. There's so many books out there. And,
Mhm.
I've said, okay, it's
Reach
okay
out
to
to
do
me.
the
I'll give you
work.
book recommendations.
Okay, all right, I'll send them to you. I'll send
I
them to
can
you.
be you could just tell them, "Hey, you know what? I do not have the energy for you right now, but go talk to
Yeah,
Alissa."
I'll send you, because
Uh,
I'm like, no, I don't need white fragility personally, because
yep.
I don't know the white experience. But just, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if you are invested in being a better friend to me, be invested in doing some work, you
Mhm.
know, to get to know me, to kind of understand my experiences. And you will never will, and I'll never get yours. And that's a beautiful thing about life. We're different, we're unique, we have different experience. And I don't want somebody who thinks exactly like me.
Yeah.
I just don't. But people just have to be willing to do the work, and have the conversation. So I thank you again for your transparency, your honesty. And I said this was going to be an honest conversation about race. I hope you were able to share some truths. I was able to share some of my truths. And you know what? This conversation, I really hope it sparks some deep conversations between different races, coworkers and mothers and daughters and, and friends. And I have so many Caucasian friends who have come to me and they are suddenly related to somebody Black, like, a niece or a cousin.
I have Black kids. I'm married to a Black man. I can't be racist. Okay.
Yes. And then you know how that conversation goes, and nothing's wrong with it, but then they're like, "Yeah, I'm exempt. I'm exempt from everything." And so it's ongoing. I'm going to continue to have as many conversations as I can. I'm going to continue to educate myself on how to get this information to my kids better, because I want them to be, they're already phenomenal people, and I want them to be even more phenomenal, that hopefully by the time they get to my age, we're not having this conversation, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I would say I'm gonna leave with two personal Alissa Daire Nelson quotes. Uh,
Right.
I believe that our job as parents is not to raise good kids. Our job as parents is to raise great adults. And so think about that as you're having these conversations with your kids. I'm speaking more to the audience than you, Suzanne, right? Just think about that. Like, we don't just want good kids who kind of get through life. We want great adults who are going to contribute in a positive way. And then the last thing I'll say is specifically to white folks who are nervous about this conversation. You're gonna F this up. You're going to mess up. You're going to misstep. You're going to offend somebody. You're going to not get it right. But darn it, care enough about this, care enough about getting it right that you're willing to get it wrong,
Mm,
apologize, and then move forward.
okay. All right. I think that perfectly sums it up. So I thank you for being on the podcast. I absolutely believe this was one of my best ones. And I am looking forward to when it's released, just the feedback on the conversations that I'm going to get from my friends and my listeners just in regards to this. And if nothing else, I hope this podcast inspires somebody to have that difficult conversation with somebody in their lives, and not somebody who just wholeheartedly agrees with you, but somebody who has a different opinion. And maybe we can get to the other side of this. So I'm going to have Claire say, Alissa say bye-bye, and then I'll say bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening.
That's it. Thank you. Until next time, this is Suzanne signing off.